Hey, they're synchronized. Good morning and welcome to the March 15th special meeting of council. The city of Parksville recognizes the people of the Coast Salish nations and the traditional territory upon which we gather with gratitude. I'd like to have approval of the agenda, if I may. Do I have a mover and seconder for the recommendation that the March 15th, 2023 special council meeting agenda be approved? Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Wood. Are there any errors or omissions? All those in favor? That carries. Thank you. Today we have a staff presentation by Ms. Holmes. Ms. Holmes, could you please give us a background regarding the draft 2023-2027 final financial plan, or an introduction to the 2023 financial planning process, and a presentation of the financial plan proposals and 2022 carry forward amounts for the draft 2023 to 2027 final financial plan. Ms. Holmes. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you.
Good morning.
So we've got lots to get through today. I'll work through first a brief overview of our financial planning process for this year, just a bit of economic overview, a bit of lay of the land as you're deliberating the financial plan for this year, and then some specifics, which initially is looking at some proposals for new service levels for council's consideration, as well as looking at projects that were started in 2022 that we need council's approval to bring forward into 2023. You will have seen most of these during the amended financial plan process last fall, but we need to finalize numbers based on what actually happened by the end of the year, as well as any projects that didn't end up being completed that we thought we might have that were not included as part of the amended financial plan. So that'll be hopefully our only kind of major spreadsheet part of today. And I do try to minimize those and bring it to you in a way that is understandable. So feel free to ask questions at any time and I'll just get started. So this year we have 3 meetings in the next 12 days, which is going to be a lot of information coming at you. But today we're going to go through the items I just discussed. Next Wednesday will be our general fund operating and capital, which is all the kind of basic municipal services. And then March the 27th, which is the following week, will be specifically the water and sewer funds and looking at operating and capital for those as well. From those 3 meetings, we would hope to have any more direction from council and feedback on what was included in those initial financial plans. And on April the 12th meeting would be bringing that all together for another look at some scenarios around property tax rates and utility rates. So that's what we have in place right now. Obviously, that is subject to change or additional meetings as council requests. The next stage then would be the adoption of the financial plan bylaws, water and sewer rates bylaws, and tax rates bylaws, and that typically happens in May. It must happen before May the 15th is our legislation requirement. So just at a very high level, there's a lot of services that are provided by Parksville specifically. Not every municipality is the same, but I think you're familiar with the ones that we do provide, and we have nearly 100 staff that provide these services, and some of these services are also provided by contract. For example, the RDN, we have a contract to provide our solid waste services. So this is just kind of an overview of some of the things that we do provide. And then on the other side are the things that our City of Parksville financial plan doesn't include and that are provided by other jurisdictions, things like education and transit, healthcare, social planning and housing, and library services. Those are all provided elsewhere. And so we just want to make sure that we understand what our financial plan reflects and then what it doesn't. The other question that we often get from our residents is when the property tax notices go out, the RDN is on there and the library is on there. So those are financial plans that are done by those specific jurisdictions, and we just collect the funds and remit on their behalf. So those are not a part of our financial plan, but they are a part of theirs. The other thing that's important to understand about these first few meetings of the financial planning process is that this is our core financial plans, which means that looks at what services we have provided in the past and brings them to 2023 to 2027 at current costing levels. And we'll get into a discussion about how a lot of those costs have increased. But right now, we're at the same level of service that we were at last year at current pricing. What staff does is do an analysis of what it costs currently to provide those services. So that may be wages, materials and supplies. All of our maintenance costs need to be considered. So regular maintenance and replacement is included in that core financial plan. What we bring to council for direction is new levels of service, and we'll get into some of those later in this meeting. So that's where we're looking at maybe adding a staff member or another asset or direction from council to provide something different. And so that would be something that we would add to that core service level and get direction from you on how to finance that, whether that's an increase in property taxes or user fees for our utilities, or perhaps there's some one-time funding that council may choose to use if it was, say, an asset purchase or something like that. So just want to make sure we have an understanding of levels of service. Today, we're going to talk about some possible increases in levels of service, but the first financial plans coming to you will just be the core service levels. Any questions on service levels? That's an important kind of factor as we're looking at this. Okay, with respect to our financial plan, there's a lot of inputs that go into the financial plan that staff looks at and includes in various amounts. It also includes direction from council on changes that you might like to see, or things that you've heard from residents and taxpayers that they would like to see in our financial plan. A big factor this year that we'll talk a little bit more in detail is what are our inflation rates? What do we assume within our financial plan model for cost increases? And the standard 2% per year that we've used for a long time just isn't appropriate anymore. So we're trying to be more fine-tuned in our model and looking at specific items and where cost increases are rather than kind of a broad brush, as well as really looking at what have our actual cost increases been. And in some cases, those have been much more significant on the capital side, but we're seeing some areas of our operating that also have very significant cost increases. So we've tried to look at that in much more detail than we have in the model in the past. The other major input is our BC assessment and population forecasts, and we'll go through a little bit more of that. But obviously the assessment value, we've seen some big jumps in Parksville. Last year was about 30%. This year's only 13%. And so we need to have an understanding of how much of that is just market change and how much of that is actually new build that generates new taxes. And then our population is also moving up as indicated by our census last year. And we have some tipping points in populations that will set in motion some different costs for the city. So we'll go through a bit of that. Obviously, a big part of our budget is employee costs, whether that's wages and benefits, but as well as training costs. A large number of our employees are governed and their costs are determined by our QP collective agreement. That expired at the end of December last year. So we've got some assumptions built into the financial plan with what neighboring jurisdictions have settled at and doing a best guess on that, because as it's looking right now, I don't think that collective bargaining will be complete before the end of our financial planning process. So we'll make adjustments going forward. Another significant input to our financial plan is the state of our infrastructure and our asset management. As council knows, we're doing a lot of work recently and this year on asset management. And we'll be bringing a lot to council about what that has found, what those valuations have determined, and what the master plans are suggesting in terms of asset renewal, costing, maintenance costs. So this financial plan this year, again, is doing a best guess from staff's perspective about what those costs are. A lot of that asset management is going to bring a lot more really strong data to the financial plan for long-term financial planning and asset renewal. So that is a significant determinant in what will go in the financial plan this year, but more importantly, next year when we have that data. We have some amounts that come from other agencies, including in our financial plan. For example, our sewer fund has an amount that is provided by the RDN with respect to the wastewater treatment plant. That's something that comes from them as a cost and is included in our financial plan. There's a number of different funding opportunities that we try to reflect and get your direction on in the financial plan. For example, the new nearly $5 million that we have from the province will be a big number this year for council's consideration. But the other part of that is that when we have alternatives for funding different things. We try to bring those to you for your decisions so that if there's a different way it can be funded that is less impactful than another, we can try and provide that. What I will remind you is in terms of best practices, it's best to have a sustainable funding level for sustainable activities that are ongoing and consider other one-time funding opportunities for one-time purchases. That's not written in law, but it's just a best practice that you can keep in mind as you're considering different alternatives. Another part of this is our general financial position, and Parksville has been in a very strong financial position and been well managed for a long time. What we do need to look at though is looking at capital reserves and should we be putting more aside specifically for capital replacement. I would suggest to you that yes, we do need to do that, but we'll take a look at that. Council will also be receiving the audited financial statements early in May or towards the end of April, which will give you a spot in time at the end of December of 2022 as to where we're at on that. And finally, there's staff recommendations. Our staff are the ones that are out in the community and looking at how we operate and hearing feedback from our residents. So there may be things coming to council that are staff recommendations on how we can improve or bring new service levels to the financial plan, and those will be identified as such when we go through it. Another critical part of our financial plan is the public consultation, and that doesn't just happen during this budget season. It happens all year round that you're getting feedback from taxpayers and residents and bring that forward during financial planning time, but also during the year. So you'll see that in today's presentation, there's items that have been resolutions from council to defer to the financial planning process. So we try to bring those forward during this time unless there's a more urgent need for it to be dealt with during the year. We also have our Let's Talk Parksville platform. There's items on our website. There's social media around the financial planning process. So we try to engage as much as possible to get feedback from our residents on that. What I will comment, and as you know, there's increases across the board, whether that's at the RDN level, in people's groceries, in all kinds of costs. So not only is the city experiencing inflationary adjustments, so are our residents. And so we try to kind of keep that in mind and take feedback from them on where those pinch points are for them. There is a legal requirement to consult with our public on our financial plan. And so that's a variety of ways that we do that. Looking at inflation specifically, as you know, it's been an unprecedented couple of years with respect to inflation and with respect to inflation rates. Last year, when we were going through our financial planning process, we were looking at about a 5% inflation rate and just thinking we would never see higher than that. And it peaked at 8.1% last June. So it's just really, as I commented earlier, something that we've been trying very hard to incorporate into our financial planning to make best guesses on the estimates, but it has been something that's been very challenging for all of us. Our interest rates also have gone through the roof. The Bank of Canada trying to manage this inflation rate and keep it in that kind of 2% band, which they haven't quite done yet. They're still working on that, but we've seen interest rate hikes, again, unprecedented in the last 40 years. And the good news is for that, it helps with our interest income. The downside is that there's a lot of factors that are being impacted, including for our residents, where their own personal finance situation has been impacted by this. In terms of what the Bank of Canada is saying, they're confident that we're going to get back to that 2% range within a couple of years. So our model is kind of looking at a downward cycle on inflation. I think we'll be conservative in that regard because we haven't really seen it yet, but we do need to try and factor that in. It's still quite unpredictable, and we'll continue to keep an eye on that as we move through the year and understand the impacts to the city's operations. Some of the cost pressures specifically that I've received feedback from amongst our staff and our senior team. Vehicles, we've seen significant cost increases, and there's been reports come to council where we've gone to tender on vehicles and has come back even within months at a significantly higher number. In addition to that, we'll get a contract on a vehicle. There's such demand for these vehicles that in order to actually get them delivered, one, it takes maybe twice as long as it used to. Maybe we would get a vehicle in 8 to 12 months. Now it's taking 12 to 24 months. those contracts are not even firm. They're saying there's additional payments related to that. And when you kind of balk at that a little bit, there's people lined up behind ready to buy those vehicles. Those amounts haven't been significant, but just the fact that even with the contract, those amounts aren't firm. So we're trying to factor in increases in that. We've seen our insurance increases go up a minimum of 20 to 30% over the last 3 years. So that number is very significant across all of our departments. Construction costs, as you've seen, as we've come back to council with capital projects, we've seen construction increases of 40 to 60% since pre-COVID. Concrete, lumber, other materials and supplies. So that's very significant. Fuel costs are, as you know, really variable. So we try and do our best guess on that because our fleet does use a lot of fuel. But, you know, there's some stats for you. Last year, the lowest price was $1.46 a liter. The highest price was $2.43 a liter. So just about $1 difference in a liter. It's really hard to estimate based on that. So we're, again, having our fleet staff give us our best guesses on that. Paper, you know, just something that we go through, although we're trying to use less. You can just see the variability from July 2021 was $40 a box to the end of December was $68 a box. These are just some examples of what we're seeing and trying to incorporate into the financial model. Quick overview on our BC assessment numbers. We had, as I mentioned, about a 13% increase this year, which seems much more moderate as compared to last year's over 30%. We didn't get nearly the same number of calls from residents this year when their assessment notices came out. What I will note, though, is that of the $653 million total increase, only 90 million of that was non-market, i.e. new inventory, new building, which would generate new taxes. Although that will generate new tax revenue for us, we need to keep in mind what additional services are required to service those new residences as well. So typically brand new construction like that does increase our assessment isn't necessarily net revenue positive for the city because there are additional services required. The other thing that I'll note with respect to our increasing assessments is something that has been a really great feature about Parksville has been our affordable housing. And so now we're seeing that for our employees and our volunteers, that's becoming a more challenging scenario. And so it is an important factor as we talk about retention and recruitment of employees. Is that something that we were able to say before, come to Parksville, the housing's cheaper, and we're not really seeing that now. In fact, many of our employees are living in Nanaimo or elsewhere because they can't afford to live here. So as much as this sometimes looks like a boon for our property tax revenue, it has some costs that go with it as well. With respect to our population, we've got lots of units being built, but our census did come back last year at 13,600. One of the factors that is kind of a tipping point for population in Parksville is once we hit 15,000 population, our RCMP cost structure changes significantly. Currently, we pay 70% of the per capita cost of an RCMP officer plus related facility costs. Once we get to that 15,000, the whole structure changes and it goes to 90% plus 90% of some other numbers that we don't contribute towards right now. And so what I would suggest and what we'll bring to council is a consideration perhaps of starting to build some reserves around that impending increase. In our population modeling, we're expecting we would hit 15,000, notwithstanding other pandemics and things like that, but 2027 or 2028. So we're within close to this 5-year financial plan modeling. And I think we need to start preparing for that because it's a very significant number. It looks like when I look at some cost estimates that from 1 year to the next, when we flip that over, it increases costs by about $800,000 to $1 million. And so having the ability to plan for that and perhaps smooth that transition to some degree may be prudent and appreciated by our residents. The other thing is as we increase in population, there's other tipping points that maybe aren't as hard and fast as the RCMP, but it may be that all of a sudden we've got more parks employees that are needed or more folks that are cleaning washrooms at facilities in the city. So our staff watches for those points where we get to a point where we can't keep up with the work anymore with new population and functions that are impacted by that. And so it may be that those come to council as essentially increased service levels that really are required as a result of increased population. The other factor that may come with an increasing population is just the need for changes in our fire department as well that come with that. In terms of our employees, we have a fantastic staff here at the city, more than 100 employees, most of whom are included within our QP collective agreement, but there's 22 exempt staff as well as 3 term employees that are special project staff. In 2023, approved in last year's financial plan was a new fire rescue services technician that'll be recruited towards the end of 2023 and be ready to start full-time in 2024. We also had some co-op students. Again, that hasn't been something that we've had success in hiring yet, but see it as a really beneficial exercise, especially with respect to recruitment. And so those are there. Other staffing proposals would first come to council in a closed meeting for discussion and then brought forward as a change in the financial plan from there. And that meeting would happen on March the 27th. As we talked about, the collective agreement expired at the end of last year. So we've got some assumptions based within that, and council will be involved in understanding the changes to that within the closed meeting. And just again, some recruiting and retention challenges that we're facing across the board in recruiting all different levels of staff, but making sure our wages are competitive. Our cost of housing, which has been something we've been able to count on in the past, is no longer the case. And finding, is there good entertainment and recreation opportunities for family, jobs for spouses and things like that. So those are some of our factors that we're contemplating around employees, which just for your information, we issued T4s of about $8.5 million. So that's kind of our wages number, just base wages, not including benefits. So it's a significant number. They do a lot of great service for all of these different functions that we're going to talk about as part of our financial plan. But even when you're just looking at the base increases in staff wages, it's a significant number for property taxes and utility rate increases.
Jetta, could I I missed that number, the total T4s?
8.5 million.
8.5, thank you.
When the financial statements come to you, there's a statement at the end of the financial statements that breaks out the costs by function rather than by department. So it would show labor and materials and supplies. That number there includes all of the benefits and training and other labor costs as well. That number I just provided to you is just our wages. But it is good to know that it's significant and is something to contemplate as we move through this. On the revenue side, we've talked lots about expenses. We have a number of different funding sources that council will be looking at as we move through the financial plan. There's all of our general operating revenues. Those are our annual revenues that happen year after year. Things like property taxes and utility fees. We have investment income on our investments and reserves. We have fees for service and agreements, things like the RDN Fire Services Agreement, where our fire department provides services to French Creek and Saint-Periel. So that's something that is in as an annual amount. There's grants that come along from time to time. One grant that we do get every year is our Small Communities Grant from the province, which is about $300,000, but that's about the only grant that is a regular recurring item. The other part of that is the traffic fine sharing grant that's typically about $115,000 a year. I see a couple questions.
Go ahead, Councillor Beale.
Thank you. Through the mayor to Ms. Holm. I'm just curious, at what population threshold are we no longer a small community for getting the Small Communities Grant?
That's a good question. I don't know that anymore, but I can find that out for you and follow up.
Councillor Gore.
Okay, good one.
Yeah.
Great.
Any other questions at this break? Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Carry on.
So the other thing I would say about grants that we've talked about in the past is all kinds of different opportunities come along for grants. Our communications manager, Deb, watches for those and monitors and brings those to our attention as they come up. Not all grants are as grand as they seem. Sometimes they come with a lot of reporting, or sometimes they require a very significant share on behalf of the city, or it's maybe a grant that's not consistent with council's strategic plan. So I think it's important, as much as these opportunities come along, that we evaluate them with a critical eye and make sure that they're consistent with where the city is going. But we have been very fortunate over the last number of years to receive a lot of grant funding towards projects. And that's been fantastic, because the city benefits with having these facilities or additions to our community at very little cost to the taxpayers directly. So there's certainly something we want to keep an eye on. We have reserves, and as I've mentioned to council in the past, bringing a reserves policy is an important thing to do, and I expect we'll do that this fall so that we can have very strategic direction on our reserves accumulation.
Thank you. The answer is 19,000.
Thank you. So again, that's another one of those tipping points on population, which we're ways away from that, but thank you for that. Some of the reserves that we have are things like our statutory land reserve, and with the sale last year of the Jensen block next door, we had funds come into that. And then we used some of that to purchase the 2 properties adjacent to the fire hall, but there's still about $1.3 million remaining in that can be used for a variety of capital purposes. We have non-statutory reserves as well, where we put money aside related to different contingencies or carry forward items. So those are pretty actively managed. And council 3 years ago decided to put 0.5% of the property tax increase as a direct contribution to capital reserves. And it accumulates exponentially each year. So the first year, I think it was 50,000, then it went to 75. Last year's contribution was 150,000. And this year's contribution, if you maintain that same level, would be 325. And I believe the resolution at the time was to do that for 5 years and then hold steady. What I would suggest to council for your consideration is, as we look at all of this asset management work, I know that we're going to need to put more aside. I don't know what that amount exactly is, but I think the sooner you start on that, the more opportunity there is for that to accumulate, both in base amount as well as interest. So council may want to consider bumping up that 0.5% to a larger percentage, just to start building those funds, and keep it as general as possible right now so that it leaves you with flexibility. But I do know that when we look at our infrastructure, the renewal of that is going to be an expensive enterprise. And so the sooner we can be putting funds aside to fund that, the better.
Thank you, Jetta. Just for clarification for those in the audience and for those listening on the Zoom, just there was a question by Councillor Beal to what level the communities became from small to medium. Councillor Grenz was able, it may have not been clear what Councillor Grenz had said to everybody else. The jump from small to medium is 19,000. So just so you understand what the perspective about the 19,000 figure that just kind of jumped out of nowhere there. That's what it's referring to. That's when we jump to a medium. So for those that were listening and wondering what that was about. Thank you.
Thank you. Just one more comment about reserves. At the end of 2022, we have about $4 million in our capital reserves between general, water, and sewer. And what I would offer for reference on that is our Moss Avenue renewal project was nearly that. And so that's one project, right? So my point about trying to build that up sooner than later so that we can be in a decision-making place to have that as an option. Obviously, there's other funding opportunities, including debt, if council wants to consider that. Typically, Parksville has not had significant debt. We've used it for very significant projects like the water treatment plant. But it certainly is, because of our strong financial position, something that could be considered for large infrastructure projects. The gas tax or Canada Community Building Fund, this is the last year we'll be receiving that money. We've received about $600,000 a year for probably a dozen or more years now. And the current agreement is done March 2024, which is the federal year end. So our last payment is this year. There is discussion about a renewal of that agreement, but nothing is in place. What UBCM is saying though is that we need to spend the money we've been given. And so that puts them in a stronger bargaining position to say it's still needed by municipalities. What I have assumed in the financial plan is that this is our last year. I've made no guess about what it might be renewed at or at whatever amount. So this is the last year and you'll see that in the financial plan. What we do with the gas tax reserve, we receive it and we transfer it directly to the reserve. And so when council decides that there's projects that would be funded from that, then we transfer out of the reserve and into our financial plan to fund that. One more funding source that I would comment on is our development cost charges. We collect those fees related to new development. And then when there's infrastructure projects identified within our DCC bylaw that are due to be constructed, then those DCC funds are brought into our income to fund those. And they're funded to some percentage. It's not 100%. The current residents also pay a share of that. Next year, 2024, is when we have the DCC bylaw in the financial plan for renewal. And that needs to be done periodically just because projects within the bylaw get completed and they need to be updated and new projects identified because DCC funds can only be spent on projects that are identified within the bylaw. Next slide is a bit of a discussion and illustration of what happens with our capital funding. And just for clarity, last year it was proposed to council that we adopt a sustainable capital funding model, and it's sometimes referred to as a capital funding envelope. And what it really means is that out of property taxes or out of utility fees, council will decide on the maximum amount of capital it'll fund in a year. Functionally, that means that we would take that amount and transfer it into capital reserves every year so that that's a sustainable amount of expenditure. And then as projects are identified, the amount comes out of capital reserves to fund the capital projects in any one year. Factors that can impact what projects get done in a year include things like staff capacity, the availability of contracts and materials. As council's seen, we've had a lot of projects carrying forward just because we haven't been able to get the people to do it, whether that's in-house or contractors. There may be other funding alternatives that can be used. And so rather than use those capital reserves that have been put aside, we can leave those there and use gas tax or maybe a grant that comes available. The DCC bylaws will also impact what gets done in a year. So if there's a project, then we can use some DCC funding. Climate change may impact what projects are on the table to be done. And overall, we want to be choosing our asset renewal based on the risks that are associated with asset failure and other factors that'll be considered in our asset management plans. So there's a lot of factors come together. What I would propose though is that in terms of managing that sustainable level of property taxes and other fees, is that adopting this kind of capital funding envelope allows that number to be consistent rather than up and down depending on the actual projects done in a year. And so the financial plan reflects that. Last year, council approved a maximum of $4 million across the general water and sewer funds related to infrastructure renewal. So that doesn't include other capital projects. We were just looking at if we're redoing a road or water main or things like that. And so we'll continue to work with this model, especially once we get our asset management plans and see what level of financing is actually going to be required for our asset renewal. That number may need to be changed, may need to increase, which I think is the most likely direction it'll go. And so what we'll do is bring analysis back to council about that so that we can give you recommendations on what we think that number should be and really start to use our reserves as the place where we save our capital funds and fund that in a sustainable way rather than have property taxes and utility fees go up and down related to projects in a year.
Councillor Gore.
Thank you, Mayor. As we know, this council is quite keen on the national assets being added to our inventory. What do you suspect could be I mean, the capital expenses would go down if we have those natural assets added to our capital assets? Or would we also see some management costs added to these expenses if we have those natural assets? Like, where do you see having those natural assets? I'm hoping to have these expenses come down as we have more of natural assets do some work for us.
Not that I'm an expert in this area and we haven't done a lot of work in it, but I would suggest to you there may be nominal changes, right? There's assets that are currently providing benefit to the city that don't cost us any money. There's some that do cost us money. However, that said, there have been creative ways to use natural assets for different problems that may come up for the municipality. For example, in Powell River, they had an issue with some storm sewer management and runoff. And so they had a whole engineered solution that was going to be, I don't know what the number was, $700,000. Somehow they came to look at a whole area of forest that was adjacent to where this was needed, and they were able to spend a very minimal amount to work the water and have it come through that natural area that they didn't end up having to spend the $700,000. So I think that's a one-off creative solution. I don't know that there's solutions like that for everything, but if there are some, then certainly that would save the city money. I don't know how our natural assets compare with those of Powell River and whether there are opportunities like that, but certainly as we're working through our asset management journey, we'll be looking for those. And as we identify them, one of the financial plan proposals today is to start working on our tree inventory. And that'll be one of those first steps in part of our asset management planning for natural assets, but it's more on the work plan for next year. So we'll be in a better place to have discussions around that and how those might be used. Again, like I say, a lot of the natural assets that are to the benefit of a municipality are often not owned by the municipality. And so, we don't incur cost to manage them, but we maybe don't have the ability to go and change them or use them either in different ways. So I think that'll be part of the learning journey for all of us, is to see how that fits into City of Parksville infrastructure and assets. My only other comment, just on terms of funding our capital expenditures, what I would see this model using going forward is for the replacement of our current assets. If we were going to build a new asset, a new facility or something like that, that would come out of new money or one-time money. And then we would start to fund the replacement through our reserves. And so if council had something that was a new item they wanted to build rather than a replacement, then we might look for other funding alternatives than capital reserves related to those. Okay. Next week, when we start going through some of the capital plans, we can certainly discuss this more, and it might be clearer when you're looking at it on paper as to how the finances come and go on that. Some of the kind of larger infrastructure and capital asset projects that we have happening in 2023, there's some that were in last year's financial plan. All the asset management initiatives that we're talking about, the valuations, the condition assessments. We have a dedicated capital asset accountant that's really helping us make strides in this area, and then actually doing asset management plans. We've got a number of community parks projects, and then we've got master plans for all of our linear infrastructure in the works right now. There was 3 approved last year. The transportation master plan was approved for starting in 2024, and you'll see that coming forward. We also have video inspections being done on our sanitary and storm sewers. In 2024, there's a very significant water system instrumentation and controls renewal that is in our core budget. It's a replacement of equipment that is already in place, but that's even though it's a very significant number, it's just part of what we need to do. We have our wetlands management plan, as well as looking at other ecologically sensitive areas, and council approved last year for that to be funded with that new grant, that local government climate action program grant, which is $127,000 for 3 years. So 2024 is the middle year of that. Whether that continues, we don't know, but council did approve for that to be used for those projects. We've got our gathering plaza and then all the incidental adjacent infrastructure works that may come up as a result of that. And council's already seen an initial report on that. We've got some PCTC upgrades happening and as well as the Moss Avenue infrastructure renewal for all of our linear infrastructure there, which council received a report on that last month. Looking at overall financial position, as I mentioned earlier, the city has been in a strong financial position. And what I'll do is go through some of these balances that I would like you to keep in mind as we're looking at different projects and proposals that are coming forward so that you have an understanding of where there might be funding alternatives to consider for various projects. So the one we chatted briefly about was our Gas Tax Canada Community Building Fund. Gas tax is so much easier to say. I wish they would keep it simple. But at the end of 2022, we had about $5.3 million in that reserve. Our last payment of this agreement expected is about $635,000 this year. Within 2023 financial plan, which you'll start to see next week, there's about 2.3 million that's been allocated to projects. And that includes some to the Moss Avenue infrastructure renewal, 705,000 to the projects in Community Park, including the sports courts at 295,000. And then that $410,000 project, which is the multi-use, the accessibility upgrades that was approved by council last year. I'm suggesting that we could use it for our transportation master plan of $150,000. And then there's the carry forward that was applied last year was the asset valuations and condition assessments, $150,000. So that's already in place in 2023 as allocations of that money. We'll earn some interest on it. So our balance at the end of this year, I'm estimating would be about $3.8 million. So I guess as we move through this, there's opportunity there for council to consider using gas tax for different projects. There are allocations right now in 2024 to 2027 of $750,000 per year just towards infrastructure. And so it's not allocated to a specific project, but what I'm saying is that could also be allocated elsewhere. It's not kind of a determining factor on those projects. And so there's funds there for council to consider as we move through the financial planning process. And again, UBCM is strongly encouraging municipalities to spend these funds or at least have them allocated in a significant way within their financial plans.
Councillor.
Thank you, Mayor. So in the second line in the box, should it be 2023, Jenna? Payments expected in 2022 or 2023?
Oh, yes, sorry, 2023.
Thank you.
Thought I caught all my years. Right now, I'm working on last year's audit with Marley and this year's financial plan for 5 years, and I try and make sure I've got my years straight. Just a reminder on what types of projects are eligible to be used with gas tax. The overriding thing is that they must be primarily for public use or benefit, but that can also include all kinds of planning documents. So like our master plans, a lot of our asset management work can be funded from gas tax. There can be sustainability plans, long-term infrastructure plans, as well as kind of the harder assets like active transportation, linear infrastructure, public transit, sport infrastructure, tourism infrastructure, cultural infrastructure. There's all sorts of things, climate mitigation. And the newest thing last year was that it can also be used for the fire hall. And so as we're looking forward at the need for a renovation to our fire hall, which is one of the proposals today, the gas tax is something that could be considered for funding that. I think it's, you may want to consider things that are impactful to the community on using this gas tax, because it is one of those one-off type funding items that is not necessarily a sustainable funding, but can be used for some of these projects that are still really strategically important to the city. In terms of Parksville projects that are in the financial plan that you may want to consider or that are already allocated gas tax funds, what we'll try to do as we're moving through the financial plan is identify those for you for a decision. But some of them that I've noted already, there's trails, there's things like the wetlands, the Maple Glen Trail, Rathtrevor, infrastructure plans and infrastructure renewal, asset management plans and condition assessments, which, as I said, we're already using some gas tax towards those. The sports courts in the community park, fire hall, disaster mitigation. If we're looking at some of the climate change impacts, there's availability within gas tax to use that. And then lots of things around water conservation and demand management plans and things like that. So there's lots of opportunity. It used to be much more restrictive, but there's quite a wide breadth of projects that it can be allocated towards. The other fund that we received in late 2020 was the COVID Restart Grant. And the province or the city was fortunate to receive about $2.8 million from the province on this. And so again, the restrictions around this were quite loose, but it was meant to fund kind of impacts from COVID. And so you can see there where we've allocated over the last 3 years, the first year, 980,000, 2021, 700,000, and then in 2022, 470,000. So we've got about 700,000 remaining at the end of 2022. Within the financial plan, we have most of that allocated to projects, including to our special project managers, as well as some business continuity and hazard identification plans, and an upgrade to the forum of $100,000. So what I wanted to bring to council's attention and for some direction is that in that initial allocation that was done by council at the end of 2020 was $100,000 towards the pool and feasibility studies related to the pool. That may be something although there's no kind of set deadline on spending this money, the province is again encouraging us to get that done. And now we've got some more money from the province, is that council may want to redirect that money that was originally allocated to the pool. Perhaps, and this is one of the financial plan proposals today, is perhaps allocate additional monies to upgrade the forum to be more functional with AV equipment and be more functional as an EOC were that ever needed. So I just want to bring that to your attention as well. That would leave about another $45,000. And there's 2 proposals today for some other IT equipment that we could use COVID funds towards. So we're getting to the end of these monies, but I just want to bring that to your attention. And it is something that there's still a little bit of flexibility there in terms of how that could be allocated. And then the one that is most recent is our 4.789 million from the province. We haven't received that yet, although we're expecting to receive that within the next week or so, including some parameters around that. Although I'm seeing all kinds of announcements around the province of municipalities that are spending it already. We don't really know what it means other than it's meant to be to kind of assist with growing communities. We don't know whether that means only capital or it could be operating. So we're still somewhat up in the air, but hoping to get some more information, and we'll bring that to council as soon as we have it. What we do know is that there's going to be minimal reporting required, and we're grateful for that. What you'll see when the financial statements come to you is that at the end of our statements is one statement on the spending related to that COVID grant. We understand that this grant will be the same. There'll just be a statement attached to our financial statements that says, here's how much we got, here's how we spent it, and update that each year just for reporting out. So finance is grateful for the minimal reporting required. We are expecting to receive the funds in our bank before the end of March. So that'll be on the ground. So what we'll need from council is some direction for what you think we should do with it this year. What I would recommend to you is that it's an opportunity to make some strategic investments, whether that's in new infrastructure, in reserves, or something altogether different. But it's something that we could just park, right? Just put it in the financial plan as revenue received, and you don't have to decide specifically what to spend it on before this financial planning session is done if you wish to wait for your completion of your own strategic planning and things like that. So we'll have lots of time to discuss that over our next coming meetings, but I just want to put that on your radar that we'll have to put it in somewhere, and we can put it in as a placeholder unless you have other direction on that. And then we'd be happy to take that whenever you've got that ready.
Thanks, Janet. And just a question, when would you like that discussion to happen? Would you like to in the upcoming budget presentations? Do you want resolutions from the floor, or do you want it in standard council meetings when we can have a discussion in the public? when would be appropriate for that, other than, as you say, waiting for a strategic plan to be inked. You know,
Yeah.
that's one direction, but maybe there's some things that can go before that strategic plan, that may not be included in that could take advantage of that gas tax. When would be the appropriate time for council members to start putting those proposals, requests through?
I think it could be at any of those times. We've got 3 financial planning meetings this month and then another in April. You've got your regular council meetings, so you could ask for it to be on the agenda if you wanted to have a discussion there. But the 3 financial plan meetings this month are public meetings, so this is a good place to have those discussions as well, because they're public, just like the regular council meetings. So that's completely at your discretion, and it could also be piecemeal, right? If there's a project that you think it may be good to go towards, you could certainly do that and leave the rest as just being received into revenue and not allocated to a specific project within the financial plan. It could just be put in reserve for the time being for future expenditures. So there's a lot of different options here. So it's wherever council is comfortable having that discussion.
There you go, council. So, you know where the appropriate time is to start putting those requests in. And so we can have that discussion in full. So let's keep that under advisement. Thank you for that clarification.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's the end of kind of my lay of the land, where we're at in terms of going forward and starting to consider some changes in service levels, some carry forwards, as well as starting next week when we're actually bringing you the financial plans related to the functional areas within the city, which have in some cases identified funding, but council has some discretion to change those, for example, allocating gas tax instead of other funds or COVID funds. So when we go through these financial plan proposals for different service levels, at the bottom of each slide, you'll note that we've provided a suggestion for funding alternatives. And so council, if you're in a position today that you wish to make a motion to have any of these added to the financial plan at this point, you could certainly do that. You could just receive them all and move forward into the next financial plan meetings. What I would suggest to you is that there's some in here that would be funded from operating revenues, and you may wish to see where the other financial plans are landing in terms of utility rate increases and property tax increases before considering whether you want to add those items. There's others, though, that are funded with one-time funding, whether that's gas tax or COVID, and you may feel comfortable today moving ahead with those if they're things that you think are strategically important to add today. So again, some flexibility on that, but we'll work through each of them, and I'll take your direction if you do want to make a motion on any of those today.
Thank you for that. I would like to suggest to council that we sit on this for now, for today, and not just be jumping out of the starting gate without having it. And plus the other factors, I would like to be at full strength with our council. I'd like Councillor Frass to be in attendance here as well, because this is very important that we have full participation by all of council. So if we could just hold off on that, if I can ask you as a courtesy, and then we can discuss, you know, like maybe the next financial meeting, that we can have a proper discussion at full strength where we have all the staff here as we do today. Thank you.
Great, thanks. So there's a summary on the first page just of the various proposals that are coming forward to you and how we would recommend they be funded. As we chatted about earlier, items that are ongoing expenditures, I suggest that we use a sustainable funding item like property taxes or utility fees. If they're one-time purchases, then we may want to consider any of those other funding alternatives that we talked about, gas tax or COVID or capital reserves. When we talk about items being funded by operating revenues, there's some items that would be funded by all 3 funds, that being general, water, and sewer, if it's a corporate-wide type item. But there may be items that are specific to one or more of those where it would be only the operating revenues of that specifically. So I've again tried to identify those as we go through. Senior staff is on hand today, so if you have any specific questions that I can't answer, they're available to take those questions as well if you like. Okay, so the first one I've listed as a council initiative because it originally came from that initial COVID allocation of funds at council's approval. And so currently there's $100,000 of COVID funding allocated to improve the forum. And that's with respect to audio visual equipment, enhanced streaming and recording, modernizing electronics at the table so that we're in a better place for that, as well as perhaps adding audio visual to the outside for large public meetings so that there would be better viewing and audio there. Because this is a joint venture building that we share with the VIU and the school district, they would be consulted on what improvements they might like to see, as well as expected to proportionally share in that. So what staff in terms of initial costing on these types of things is suggesting that 100,000 may be low for bringing this up to a more functional area, including it being set up as an EOC if that was ever needed. So what we're suggesting is that the possibility of reallocating the 100,000 that was initially allocated to the pool, reallocate that to the forum, and then we would be bringing that back to council for your input as well as getting input from our partners, but to bump up the budget to start to really consider how we could change that up. So that's the first item. And any questions on that?
Councillor Gore.
Thank you, Mayor. So if this forum is to function as an EOC, which I reckon is Emergency Operating Center, would the EMO be consulted on what equipment they might need? And my second question is, since you mentioned we have, this is a shared space with the school district, VIU, what are they willing to contribute towards the upgrades? And would $100,000 be adjusted or after we had those consultations in terms of how much they are willing to chip in?
Sure. So the first of your questions, yes, EMO would be a part of that survey in terms of what they would like to see. For example, we have a full set of laptops that are ready to implement with the EOC. We would just want to make sure that our communications capabilities and other furniture or equipment that they required would be in place as part of that, because this is meant to be our functioning EOC in the event of an emergency. So yes, they would be absolutely involved. With respect to our PCTC joint venture, the city is 69% of that. VIU is 19% and the school district is 12%. And so typically capital projects that are to the benefit of all would be shared proportionately. And so because we haven't kind of done all the surveys and got all the information, what we're suggesting is just moving that budget over to have available, and then we would bring back to council for further decision-making later in the year. But just so that could be used towards that project, they would typically share proportionally. So if the project ended up being $200,000, then we maybe wouldn't have to use all of this funds because they would share proportionally as to their percentage.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor. And perhaps this is for our CAO, Ms. Killer, maybe you can answer the EOC question again. Why is the forum chosen as the EOC and not like the fire hall? That might be more appropriate, like.
If I may, usually the fire hall is more based on the first response. And so our fire hall is not large enough to accommodate both. So what happens during an emergency is obviously the first responders are out doing their thing. And the Emergency Operations Center is more supporting that as well, but supporting citizens and communicating with senior government agencies, acquiring equipment to support recovery and response. And so with our facilities, there isn't enough space at the fire hall to accommodate that. And so we do, because we're EMO and that's an Oceanside function, we do have some space allocated in the Qualicum Beach Fire Hall, because it is there's an upper level area that's separate from their first responder area, but that's not possible in our current fire hall.
And just to further Councillor Gore's questioning, would it not be appropriate to actually get an indication from the other stakeholders here, the school board and VIU, to see if they were even in the, have the ability or the capacity to even, whether it's a 12% ask or a VIU was 19% was VIU. Would it not be more appropriate even to consider this, say, we're considering doing the following. If you feel it's a priority, would you have possibly based on your estimate, or do you have funding available? Because if they come back and say, well, we don't have anything in our budget and is it going to be a no-go? I would hate to have this amount placed marked into, an initiative that's not going to be approved by the other players. It was just my comment is just, are they interested in contributing funds? I think we should have that conversation with them first. If we have not already, I'm not sure. Maybe you have.
So I can follow up with Jamie Arden, our manager of facilities, just to see how far along he is in those conversations, because I believe there's been preliminary conversations, but more specifically, okay, what exactly are we looking at? But certainly I can follow up and report back on where those conversations are at.
Right, thank you. And then as a follow-up, the EOC, as we mentioned, is there any chance that it could not be in the new community space at the BGC Center right next door?
If I may, there is a permanent office there for their training and their meetings.
Yes.
But it's not large enough as well or configured. Doesn't have very reliable internet service. We have phone lines hard-lined into the floor here as well. And all of there's quite a few items that are stored just off to the side here to support the EOC. So in many times we do use that as like for a small event, like a single property fire. We've used that as kind of the reception area. But in a large scale event, this whole room, we've done mock exercises in here. This whole room is full. We have things all over the walls where you write updates and have stuff, going on. And we also need to be able to communicate over the internet, like with Zoom meetings and things like that. So that room would be too small for a large scale event. The other thing that we have is we have agreements, like, for example, if there was a massive event, we would probably be using the curling arena. We'd be using maybe even Wembley Mall. Like you have to kind of have redundancies as well. But this area has been for as long as I've been here, actually, for at least 10 years, established as a regional EOC. So that would be for a large scale event. And we have smaller options for the kind of one property, or maybe Martindale. We've used that area at the BGC as well for, less than 20 or 30 people that might be affected. And we usually only have the EPC operating in the EOC. So that's the emergency program coordinator. But when you have a full operating kind of level 2, level 3 EOC, you need many people. So, and 24-hour shifts sometimes. So this building is much more set up for that.
Okay, thank you. Other questions, Councilor Martin?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Jenna, the pool is being used here. Has it got $250,000 for the pool that's for research or whatever it has to be to establish what we're doing with the pool? With this, as I recall, am I right? So this would be $100,000 out of the pool fund
So
if you were to do that.
yeah,
Thank
if I
you.
may, of the 250,000, you're right, that was the amount in last year's financial plan. 100,000 of it was COVID funding and 150,000 came
Okay.
from operating revenues.
So the point is, you're not saying, well, we're not going to have a pool or anything. This is just an idea.
Not at all, just
No, okay,
suggesting
good.
that council may want to reallocate this in the short term.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilor Grimes?
Thank you, Mayor. A few questions through to the staff. With regard to the emergency use for the forum, is the forum considered to be the ideal location, like relative to the fire department for that sort of thing?
Yes. So as I mentioned, ideally we would keep those they're very different responses. So normally what you would have is like the first response. They have a ton of activity. They would probably have ambulance, police, and kind of those other first responders in their area doing very different work than we would doing very different. Is that working now?
Maybe, sorry if I can jump in, just because we're going to be looking at fire hall upgrades as well. So those wouldn't be an overlapping result, right? I guess is the question.
Yeah. So if I may, through the mayor, the Qualicum Beach Fire Hall has a separate area that's set aside in there, which we'll probably be touring hopefully in May with council. But in our situation, I think the proposed renovation, the scale and scope of that we're talking about, most likely would not be able to accommodate that without some significant changes in the cost. And this building is here already and available. And so I think with our mock exercises, touch wood, we haven't really had a regional EOC requirement in many years. So this has been kind of considered suitable to meet those needs. Not to say that it couldn't be identified as something that we would add to the scope of the fire hall renovation, but it's not required that they be in the same location. And in some cases, probably easier to have them separated so that if you think about a large scale event, you would have, quite a few people in here at all times. They'd be kind of running in and out. We have a lot of different positions, like communications and operations, where you're acquiring equipment, acquiring supplies. You need an area to kind of marshal all of that isn't in the way of the first responders. Trucks coming and going, that could be challenging to manage if it's not custom designed. So not to say we couldn't consider it, but right now we just didn't see the need for that. And currently we don't have that ability at the fire hall that we have. So.
Thank you for clarifying the sort of the non-overlapping nature of those two requests. Is there someone that may be able to speak a little bit to the non-emergency vision for the forum upgrades and how those would help with the, I already get the having more ability to host larger gatherings, with better AV equipment out there. Is there any other aspects to this that would be worth noting in terms of the vision?
If I may, through the mayor, I'll say what I think, and then Sean can jump in as now the current person in charge of EMO, although I was in charge of it for many years. So one of the things that doesn't work very well in this room for an EOC purpose is we can't move the tables. They're very hard to move. And we don't have as easy connectivity, like you have to pull things out of the floor and then that's right where people are sitting. And it's just not as easy to, like normally in an EOC situation, you've got a big kind of board table and then you have room for whiteboards and for like stuff to be stuck on the wall with all the different incidents and the updates on all kinds of things. And so ideally we would have tables that would be flexible. So for a council meeting, they would look kind of like this, then we'd be able to move them around and set up stations. So when you picture an EOC in operation, there's actually several kind of mini departments or areas that are set up and you have staff assigned to those areas. So some of them are dealing with the equipment, some of them are dealing with communication, some are dealing with communicating with the first responders and getting them what they need. So there's, I think, 6 different, where's Sean? Is it 6 different functions? Anyway, about 6. Each has its own kind of set of forms and we have laptops for each of those. So it's just easier if you can kind of co-locate everything in the middle of the room and then have the station set up on the outside. So for that purpose, having flexible furniture would be useful. And then obviously you spoke a little bit to the outside. We need to have proper security in an EOC. So having 2 doors is really helpful. So you can come in one door and out the other, and you can have people stationed to make sure that there's a secure premises, because there can be quite sensitive information and we have things written up all over the walls. You can imagine even like we sometimes have mortality information and things like that. So luckily for us, again, we haven't had to deal with that. But in large scale events, there's just a real need for security. So we also have facilities right next door to here where we can bring in food. There's a kitchen. So those types of things are super helpful.
Sorry, if I may jump in real quick. I was actually asking about the non-EOC
The non-EOC
functions
yeah,
and
so,
maybe the potential overlap or, dual benefit.
Yeah. So basically the one challenge that we find, and I think it was very evident at the public hearing that we just had, is there is no ability, like our setup here is kind of in an L shape. So folks who are kind of overflow from the council chamber can't hear or see what's happening in the council chamber at this at the same time. So in other areas, they have a large screen outside on the wall that's projecting the council activities, and there's microphones or speakers out there so that they can hear basically as if they were kind of in the room. So that's one area that we think has been identified as a deficiency. We have at least one or two of those large public hearing events. The other thing it would benefit is some of the more council-oriented events that we're hosting now that COVID is over. So like the Christmas event, that was very well attended this year, and there was people spilling out into that area that really didn't get as much of the benefit of, because they weren't right in here. So that's one thing that we think would be very helpful for city events. I'm not sure for school district, and I don't know if they have as big board meetings as we do. What else are, like, just again, the AV, like the ability to have wireless microphones for the camera, to more than one camera, and for it to actually focus in on the speaker, better visual on the presentation. So this is an upgraded, we actually used $30,000 of COVID funding already to upgrade this presentation situation and get a new camera. But it doesn't project very well onto the like Zoom. If people are participating virtually, it doesn't link as well as it could. The setup over here where it's all exposed is a huge challenge. People muddle with it all the time, you know, thinking that they're doing something, but it doesn't really work. And then just more user-friendly, you know, ability to kind of work with the microphones and with presentation stuff, so that like the chair, for example, could control the microphones, and like a mute function for folks that are maybe talking over each other, and then just more kind of wireless opportunities for presenters. So really just modernizing this entire space. I was told before by IT that this is all a mixture of analog and digital. So things don't speak very well to each other. This morning we had major chaos because we had no internet and no ability to do anything in this room for about 40 minutes. So, you know, mammoth effort from our IT department to get that up and running. That happens quite often. So just basically modernizing all of that connectivity and making it so that you don't have to trip over wires, and there would be plug-in items like on the desk, that kind of thing. Is there anything else? I'm not sure if that's everything.
Yeah, if I could just comment further on that. Thanks for that question, Joel. To me, it seems like for the special events that we've had, whether we have public hearings that are overflowing and so forth, in the past, we used to use the BGC in the auditorium there. And to me, it just makes way more sense than to have like big screens and everything and put out into the atrium here. To me, for an event that happens when maybe we have 2 a year, maybe 3 a year, the BGC is all operating again. And when I mentioned the BGC as for the ELC use as well, to me, it makes more sense logically because it's larger to do whatever they have to do with larger groups of individuals. And I don't think that there would be, if it's an emergency situation, I doubt that the daycare is going to be operating as a daycare at that time because all hell's breaking loose. So to me, it doesn't make much logical sense to convert this area into an EOC. This area is a forum, is for the public meetings and so forth. And I think it's actually looking at others that I have attended on Vancouver Island. This is a pretty good setup. It's far better than Nanaimo. So I think by trying to convert this area into an EOC, to me, it's not logically correct. You know, we're converting this area to be an EOC as well as the forum for what it is. But an EOC event is hopefully never, but it's going to be few and far between. So I think the few and far between should be not at the expense of converting this well utilized space on a regular basis just for an emergency. I think that we can overflow into the BGC. To me, it just makes logically more sense with that and to use that area for the big public hearings that we know we're going to have a crowd, because we would have to upgrade the audio visual in there. I understand, because it seemed to have gone missing in between the transition. And I fully support that. And yeah, anyways, so, and the offices are there. So, and if we don't have good internet there, well, that can be easily solved by putting in a proper modem so to speak.
If
Go
I
ahead.
may, through the mayor. So the EOC is different from the reception center. We have the BGC area identified as a reception center. So that would be where people would be hosted and like members of the public or affected individuals would be stationed there. The EOC operations is quite different. So that's kind of like our staff support behind that. So the reception center is usually supported by our volunteers. We have fantastic ESS, which is Emergency Social Service volunteers. And that's one of the things that's coordinated from the EOC function. So we're hoping to get more information for council when we do that tour with the EMO folks in Qualcomm. But I think there's a very distinct difference between, we do already have a priority on that facility. It is identified as our key reception area. We would use the small area at the front for a small event or smaller people affected. And the gym area would be used for group lodging or reception to gather people to give them other services. And normally there'd be one person in this room or in the EOC room managing that response. So there's multiple kind of, I guess, departments or streams of people in our city responsible for those that are basically happening at multiple locations throughout the city. So I think if we can provide a little bit more background on that, that'll be helpful for council, but definitely the BGC gym and front area are those reception areas identified, but it's different from our EOC. And then the other question was we could use, and we have used the PCC for large events, but we can't stream from there at the moment. We have no microphones, as you mentioned, no audio, but that could be something that council could fund and could use money from our budget to install those items and have them available for us. We did, this year, we heard from a few councillors, we did put in the budget. I think we might have been able to use the grant, I'm not sure, but we've acquired tables and chairs for that space. Yeah. So that does open the utility for us for lots of different events that the city might want to host there. And it allows for other groups to use those items as well. So I think it could be something that council could consider funding to replace those items so that you could use it as a council, but others then could use it for plays or cultural events or other community, something put on by a community group. So we could certainly look into some costing if council wants us to provide some estimates for that.
Yeah, thank you, Kiva, and I agree that maybe a good use for those COVID funds anyways to actually make the BGC actually more functional, not only just for as an EOC center, but also for other events that are in there too. So I think that would be a good way of doing it. Councillor Bill.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just a comment. Yes, my understanding of the EOC as it's described is that it's more of a command center. Thank you.
Councillor Gordon.
Thank you, Mayor. I understand we've spent a lot of time on the first item. Thank you, Mrs. Keeler, for explaining that. I was just looking that emergency management is usually a provincial jurisdiction as well. So there is some funding available through Emergency Management BC. So could we not get some money from the province when we are doing EOC upgrades? Because looking at $200,000 for AV kind of looks like it's a lot of money, but I understand now it has some EOC component to it. So I was wondering if that option could be explored or has been.
If I may, through the mayor. So every year we have been quite successful. Thanks to our previous Aaron, our previous EPC, working with Qualcomm Beach, we have received about 30,000 for Parksville's requests and about the same for Qualcomm's requests. So we have from UBCM. So we have funded a pet trailer, the group lodging supplies, the EOC digital. So all of the laptops that Jetta mentioned and other sort of digital tools. What else did we get? Many other things. Now I can't remember. Contingent funds for contingency planning. So each year there's a grant opportunity that we have prioritized and we've been very successful. Part of the reason we have been told why we get those funds is because we partner with Qualcomm Beach and they like to see that. It provides regional support. We train together, which is an efficient way to do it. And we recruit and support our volunteers. So it opens up more volunteers when we have a larger community base, and it also just allows for a lot of shared opportunities for those folks to stay engaged. So we do pursue that every time it's available. When we have an active EOC, we get a task number. So our staffing and the EOC functioning is supported and we get reimbursed from the province for that. But they don't usually give you capital funding for something that's kind of a multiple benefit, right? So the EOC piece, we can live without it. We can sit at these tables that are hard to move. That's not a problem. But I think the upgrades that we have identified in here are more for our council opportunities. And I think in the past, when we had the $100,000 discussions with the other user groups, they do presentations and have classes in here from VIU, and they very often need to use our staff to fix things. So that was identified as a lack of efficiency in that our folks are getting, whether it's our front counter staff in admin or our actual IT people having to come and assist people repeatedly because the system doesn't do what it's supposed to do. So we have, guest presenters coming in, we'll have 30, 40 people sitting here and they can't get their PowerPoint to work.
Good. Councillor Martin.
Through Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. I was here with the public meeting, and I've also was here last December when we had to open up. I can understand having the forum out there with some more audiovisual and the whole thing. That is really, this room is very functional, I think, the way it is. And even with the public hearing, if we'd had some screens out there and, it would have worked a lot better, and I can understand that. But anyway, I just wanted to mention that because it's my first experience, and I think it was really good the way it worked, but we just need more upgrades, a few more upgrades. Thank you.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Chair. Just a comment. I feel it's a bit of a public service, what we do in here, going over, say, the budget right now and regular council meetings, and the better that we can communicate with the AV experience for people who watch it either live or later. I think that provides better public service for the people who oversee us and the jobs that we do. So that's my comment. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay,
Carry on.
great. Thank you.
That was quick.
Okay, the next item is, would be supported by engineering, but it is to remove the culvert on Shelley Creek that exists at Bloor Road. And this came about through a conversation with Mibby's that I understand council was on a bit of a walkabout with them. And so that would include removing the culvert and restoring the stream bed. And the cost would be about 150,000. Funding alternatives would be gas tax or capital reserve to fund that upgrade.
Councillor Gordon.
Thank you, Mayor. So I understand this project also includes water flow monitor. Why is the city installing a water flow monitor? I thought that was more like a provincial thing again.
I'm going to defer to our Director of Engineering on that.
Yeah. Currently there isn't any stream flow monitoring on Shelley Creek, and the province doesn't intend to do any. So if any is to happen, it would have to be a city initiative.
Councillor Garofalo.
And thank you, Mayor. So I understand that was a recommendation from MIVIS to install a water flow monitor. And off the 150,000, what do you think is the cost associated with just that instrument?
If I may, through the chair, it's about $15,000 for the flow level monitoring.
Thank you for that. And then to comment on that question as well, I think it shows the initiative for Parksville City, Parksville to monitor our streams and so forth to increase fish habitat. And if we have those flow monitors in place, we can understand better, how the watershed is working. So I think it's a great idea that whether it's mandated by the province or not, that it's incumbent upon us to actually monitor our streams within our jurisdiction. The other question I had through to Mr. Boven would be, there's been some question in the past from the adjacent property that's due there, the Shelley Farm, so to speak, that there's been flooding in that area like they have never seen in the past. And I'm just wondering, would this alleviate some of that flooding that has been reported to us on that property? Would it mitigate it, or would it be a status quo?
If I may, it should help alleviate it. Right now, this culvert is undersized and it would be a pinch point within the stream flow. So once it's open channel, I mean, I can't predict what will happen, but it should improve the situation from current.
Thank you for that.
The next item is the continuation of a project that was approved by council 2 years ago, and that was to do some assessments related to the Industrial Way former landfill property. And so the phase 1 assessment is complete. Phase 2 was partially completed and approved by council, and there's a carry forward item in there to do some of those works, but there's additional funding required to complete the phase 2. To the amount of $30,000. So it would be a total of $85,000 in 2023 to complete that assessment work. Again, this is a project that would be led by engineering. So if you've got any questions on that, I would defer to the Director of Engineering. Okay.
Yes, if I may, through to Mr. Boven, I would imagine as well. The industrial road environmental assessment, is this actually the lots, the lots owned by the city? Or is this the road? I'm just wondering if I'm jumping ahead here.
That's correct, Mr. Mayor. It's 1040 and 1060 Industrial Way, the old landfill site.
Yes. So in my understanding that there's a PH1 assessment is already complete on that. The PH2 is just for further assessment. Known somehow as brownfield, before you can do a brownfield restoration, you have to have an assessment done.
That's correct.
Okay, so the PH2 55K would actually get to completion so that we had a total assessment on it.
That's correct. We'd know what we're dealing with by the end of the phase 2 as far as what may be required for remediation should we wish to do something different with the land.
Do you anticipate what kind of timeline we're looking at if we approve that 55K to have that assessment complete?
Yes, I'd have to look back to the proposal, but I think it was about 120 days. So it'll be complete this year.
That's great. That's good news. Thank you, Mr. Bowen.
The next item was a council resolution at a regular meeting to defer this request to the financial planning process. And that was a request from the Chamber of Commerce to increase their annual funding for the Canada Day community celebration by $5,000. And there's currently $10,000 per year in the budget. So it will be a total of $15,000. So this is a request to continue this funding increase year after year. And so I'm suggesting that that would typically be funded from general operating revenues. The next one was another increase requested by Parksville Beach Festival Society. And that was a one-time increase in their funding of $7,500 for 2023 alone. And that would come with all of the typical recognition of sponsoring the festival. The city already does provide some funding on this of $5,000 a year. So it would be $12,500 for 2023, and then back to $5,000 a year for the remaining 4 years in the financial plan.
Thank you, Mayor. So I understand the city provides, every year to the Beach Fest, very iconic of what Parksville is. I think there's no doubt such an important event. I do understand at the end of this fest, the Beach Festival Society does make some profit. Are you aware? And that's being distributed to the local charities in the area. And some of them may not be in Parksville. So my question is, I guess I'll have a meeting this evening with the Beach Fest folks that should there be a consultation with the city of Parksville when that money is being distributed to the local charities? My second question an actual question to you is, I mentioned about the granting aid applications. I think the amount is really low, and it's been about 5,000 for the last, I don't know, over 10 years or so. When is a good time to bring that up to be into the budget deliberations?
Yeah, through the mayor. Next week, we'll be looking at the general fund, and I will have a slide summarizing what those different grant amounts are, because council had asked to kind of look at that with a little more specificity this year. So next week, we can have that discussion if you like. And I'll have more details at that point. I mean, we're welcome to discuss it now, but there'll be more information for you next week. And with respect to how the Beach Fest distributes their profits, I just am not that familiar with it. And so perhaps your conversation this evening will provide more information on that. The only other comment I would make on this is there is some level of in-kind services provided by the city as well on this through our park staff and such while the actual festival is ongoing. So there's both a cash amount as well as in-kind.
Councillor Beal.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just a comment following up on Councillor Gore's questions about the Beach Fest. For those who may not understand how the money gets distributed to the various nonprofit organizations, the organizations that actually receive the funds later on are the organizations who have provided volunteers to actually look after the sand sculpting display and festival. So these volunteers greet people, take funds, look after the area, and that's totally done by volunteers from these nonprofit organizations, and they are the ones that then receive the benefit later on. So that's done by application. They need to have so many, and the various groups then put their name forward if they have sufficient volunteers to look after it. I know I've done it every year for a few years myself. So, that is the way that works.
Yes, and I can comment on that as well, that a lot of, I think they call them the gatekeepers. Yeah, gate ambassadors, and they do an incredible job, and they collect a lot of the donations. And it's not, I don't think profit is the correct word. It's their proceeds, and they're not Beach Festival is certainly not out to make any profit. That funding that is provided to the gate ambassadors goes back into the community for those that actually provide the volunteer time. So I think it's very worthwhile. And we should just stay out of, who gets that as well. We don't have any business controlling who does not receive the proceeds. So we'll leave it to them because they're very well organized, in my opinion.
Okay. There's several within our corporate administration area proposals, so I'll just go through those now. The first is some consulting costs related to a records management program review. And so this first stage would be doing a review of that and getting some suggestions about how we might move forward with that. In 2016, the project was approved by council in the amount of $81,000, but it actually didn't get complete in those years as a result of staff capacity at the time. So this would be funded from those funds that were collected at that time that have been sitting in reserve. And so initially the cost is estimated at $25,000 for 2023. Subsequent years would be determined based on what came as a result of that review. So that's the first proposal from administration. Okay. The next is looking at increased costs that we've seen as a result of vandalism and other costs related to our unhoused population that has increased in Parksville. This has been something that we've been tracking for about 5 years now, and the graph on the right-hand side shows how we've seen some of those costs increase and in some cases decrease. What I would suggest to you is some of those activities have become operational for our parks and other operations staff. And so it's not so much that those costs aren't actually there. Other things aren't being done because our staff has just started to operationalize the cleanup of various things in our community as a result of that unhoused population and others. And so staff is suggesting that we should be adding an incremental cost of about $20,000 this year to cover off those incremental costs so that the previous service levels can basically be reestablished in terms of park maintenance and other cleanliness, custodial costs and such within the community. Going forward, those costs are still indeterminate. There's been lots of changes of late. And so we continue to monitor that and track it, a variety of metrics on this, including hours and dollars in those different areas. And this additional funds some of it would be used towards hiring a contractor to take care of some of that work rather than our own staff. Our Director of Operations is here if anyone has any questions on that, although it is something that permeates many aspects of the city.
Thank you. And no questions to this point. I'd like to propose right now a 5-minute comfort break. It's a new term I learned from my RDN friends. A 5-minute comfort break just for everybody, just to reconvene in 5 minutes if I could.
If I may,
Yes.
I just want to let council know that this room is only booked until 12:30 today. But as Jetta mentioned, we do have multiple sessions coming up. So if we don't get to everything today, there'll be other opportunities. But VIU is booked in after us, so we don't have as much flexibility to go long as we would normally.
It's okay. Thank you. So 5 minutes, council, if you can take a break or take a walk, whatever you need.
What was that? Yeah.
Okay, if we could take our seats again, please. Thank you. Oh. Missing Joel. Doesn't he have a smartwatch? I know. Okay to
Okay.
proceed. Thank you.
Great. The next item is a work safe regulation related to let's see if I can say this, musculoskeletal injuries to workers. And as you are aware, we have many different workers within the city. And so the potential injuries are broad, from our office work to the folks that work outside as well. So this would be costs related to developing a training program related to that would then be operationalized within our staff. And then putting aside some funds for next year related to any furniture or equipment or other accommodation type items that may result as a result of putting these reviews in place. So the cost in 2023 would be 18,500, and suggesting that would be funded from operating revenues. The next item is to install permanent banners on the PCTC that would be made from metal rather than the current cloth ones. The current ones were put up for our 75th birthday celebrations. They're made from nylon and they're getting a little bit tired looking. So our manager of communications has brought this forward with a proposal to change them into metal ones with different pictures that are representative of Parksville and area. The cost in 2023 would be $6,000 to replace 8 of them, and then another $7,500 in 2024 to replace the remaining 10 banners.
Quick question on that one, if I may.
Yes,
Mayor.
go ahead, Councilor Grant.
How frequently are the banners changed normally?
I'll defer that to Deb.
If I may, to the best of my knowledge, the 75th birthday banners were the first banners that we have had on the building in years. That was just something we wanted to do to celebrate the 75th. And now the building looks great with the banners, but the banners don't look so great.
So follow up then. So I guess the answer is they haven't been, or at least in very, very long time. Is there any consideration given to having a rotation on them versus, I guess the one thing I really like this idea, but I think one of the benefits of banners is that they provide something new. So you see something new, and when you see something new, it catches your eye. Once it's been around for a long time, you're just gloss over it. It's not new anymore. And so it's an opportunity to maybe feature things like the 75th anniversary or some other, maybe community partner or something. Any thoughts on that?
If I may, I looked at this purely from a cost, and the cost of banners, nylon banners, is around $200. So this was more to do something permanent And it was a suggestion actually that came from some of the parks crew.
If I may add to that?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you.
CEO Kayla.
Through you to council, we do also have a very extensive banner partnership with the Downtown Business Association. And so those are more frequently changed. We also the previous council, or maybe two, initiated a memorial banner program so that reflects individuals from our community who have given service to different wars. And so I think all three of those elements together provide some change. One of the other items we have talked about with the PDBA, which this council would have an opportunity to discuss probably next year, I would suggest, is looking at lighting as an addition to the banner program. So having multiple kind of media, whatever, to deal with kind of that refreshing and changing seasonally and using different things. So one element of this that could be considered is having some permanent, like every second one, perhaps then being for more the changed items. But our park staff identified some of the efficiencies of not having to replace them when we have, weather elements or whatever. So at City Hall, we do have quite new and a great lighting program at City Hall. And these banners would be designed to kind of work with the lighting and be somewhat permanent on City Hall's building itself, but that wouldn't detract from the changing of the other banners throughout, just right across the street throughout the downtown.
Thank you. Just a quick comment on this. I love this idea of these metal ones. So I find that the banners, as Councilor Grens says, they get overlooked after they've been seen a little while, but this creates three-dimensional visual interest. I think that they last quite a bit and they don't look tacky or tattered at all, quickly. So I really love this idea. So be supporting this, but a question through to Deb Tardif, if I may. Are you also responsible for the wraps that they use, like usually on hydro utility transformer areas? Like I know we have one down at the community park at the entrance of Corfield. I didn't know that maybe fell in your purview, and maybe you could comment on that because I noticed that the entrance to the Jensen Greenway on Corfield at our Sand Dollar roundabout that we have there. There's a black box there. I think it's probably irrigation utilities or whatever it is. Would that be qualify for a wrap? And is there some way that we can look at putting that, because it's kind of just three questions there as usual. Thanks, Deb.
If I may, it's been years since we have done those wraps. I'm going to say close to 10 years now. And there was through operations funding that was allocated for that. We hired an artist and did work with the PDBA then to kind of get their approval. There was one done by the fire department. There was a series of them. It was an artist out of Nanaimo. I think his last name was King, but it's been years. So there is no funds at this time allocated to that. I
see. Okay. Could it perhaps be added under, like, this is kind of a similar idea on the permanent banners to look at maybe adding on to it, maybe looking at our electrical utilities or just utility boxes throughout the area to see if they're in need of a new wrap or if there's been, that to that effect. What struck me is I was at Nanaimo yesterday and right on Metro Drive and all, they have a brand new wrap right beside the Home Depot there. And it's very effective. It caught my eye while I was sitting there waiting for the light. And it was very visual and it looked better than just a utility.
Yeah, I think that's something that we could work with BC Hydro on. If it's their boxes, I'm sure we could approach them to see what could be done. But the ones that you're referring to in Nanaimo are brand new and they're modern. They're lovely.
Yeah, thank you. I believe that Mr. Bolden could probably comment on the one at the Jensen Greenway. Is that a BC Hydro box or is that a City of Parksville irrigation controller? Oh, okay, it's right at Corfield, right beside, there's a bench there and, the Parks Department have put a new, flower, or it's not flower bed, it's a Holland-friendly pollinator, garden, which is amazing and the rabbits love it. But right in the front of that garden, where the snowdrops are blooming right now, is a box that's black and it's about 5 feet high. And if, the reason I'm bringing that up, because I don't think BC Hydro would be participating on it, is what I think. I'm pretty sure it would be ours, just the way it looks. Maybe not, but if Mr. Bowman could look into that one and get clarification. Thank you so much. Carry on.
The next item is a request from finance with respect to purchasing some software that would assist significantly with our year-end financial statements as well as other reporting. This is also consistent with our department goal of reducing the amount of paper that we use. The cost of the software and setup and training is $15,000. That would be in 2023. And then in 2024, we would have an annual operating cost of about $5,200 related to licensing. The most significant impact would be for our senior finance staff, much less overtime, not working with Excel on our year-end financial statements and printing out a lot of paper. This has the ability to attach digital documents and things like that. This caseware is basically industry standard and most of the audit firms use it. So it also does provide additional opportunities for communicating with our auditors in a very efficient way.
Councillor Gretz.
Thank you, Mayor. Quick question on this. I'm definitely a huge fan of moving over to digital wherever possible, but we're in a super rapid transformation stage right now with GPT-3, now GPT-4 coming out yesterday, which is really changing how we can quickly access and repackage data. I wonder if there's any looking into how this will affect software, because it's going to affect software across the entire software spectrum. Especially like, I mean, I watched a presentation yesterday. They copy pasted the tax code into GPT-4 and said, what are my deductions based on this? And spits it out right away. So like you could do the same with Excel. So I was just wondering, is this being looked at? Because we could end up being purchasing shelfware potentially.
Through the mayor, I really don't know. I guess that's possible. I would expect, given this is kind of the industry standard, that perhaps they might make their own modifications to keep up with that. That would be my expectation, especially given the very large number of audit firms and what I understand municipalities are signed on to it. So I expect there would be a motivation to move with that, but I really don't know.
Quick follow-up then, is this like cloud-based software or is it like installed software?
I'm going to look to Marley, but I think it can be either.
Thank you.
The next, we have one item from the fire department, and that relates to looking ahead at the fire hall renovation. There has been an amount of 1.4 million parked in 2025 for a lot of years as a possible year for looking at a renovation. What we know for sure is that that number is very low. Our fire chief has been in touch with many other fire departments that have recently either built from scratch or renovated their fire halls, and we're expecting that that's probably needs to at least double and perhaps triple. What this is suggesting, this proposal, is that in 2023, what we would like to do is to get some initial design and cost estimates, really order of magnitude estimates, more than kind of really fine tuning for some of the things that we might look at the fire hall renovation. For example, right now, it's not big enough to even hold all of the apparatus we currently have, let alone if as our community grows, we need more. There's a number of different areas as noted on the slide that would be addressed within the renovation. And then that would give us some idea of what we're looking at going forward. What I would suggest though, is that we know for sure that number is likely low. And so also amending next year's to increase that number so that when you're looking at the financial plan in whole in 5 years, that we're already putting a placeholder on some additional funds in the next couple of years related to that renovation, and then can work around what that magnitude may be higher or lower, and depending on what design type elements are brought forward. The fire chief is here today. If you have any further questions, the only additional comment I would make is there's a number of different funding alternatives for this. And although the number is very significant, this is a very impactful service to our community. And we can use things like gas tax, our capital reserves, the land sale reserve can be used towards this. The other thing is that the RDN through their fire services agreement end up funding part of this. We have their service agreement, but part of the amount that is determined within that is a contribution towards capital. And so although that's the 100% number, there is funding that comes through our service agreement that would partially fund some of this. There are from time to time grants available for fire hall renovations. So there's a number of different options here. And so staff and the fire chief would like to move forward with that and doing some initial design and order magnitude estimates this year.
Just a question. I'll get to you in a second, Councillor Gore. Is there an opportunity here for us to start creating a reserve fund like we're doing on many other infrastructure? We understand, we know we're looking for a target of 24, 25 to proceed with the addition. But like we're doing with so many other, we're creating reserves. And so instead of it all just being a hit, like you pay for it when you construct it, instead of have to come up with 3.6 million, by then it'll be 5 million, but anyhow. Like in the RDN, like we're putting all sorts of reserves aside to lessen that blow for something we know is coming up in 25. Like, and I know you doing so good at creating reserves in all other areas of our budget, which is good. Would it be appropriate at this time? Is there any way that we can take part of our reserves and park it in a fire hall addition renovation fund? So that, and then, like just a certain amount. So we're spreading that impact all over a year, because in 2024, that's a big bump, even with all the grants that I know that you're going to be successful at getting. It's going to lessen that impact. I'm trying to say for the tax increase to the taxpayers, just to even it out so that we know it's coming. So let's lessen that impact when it actually happens. Is that a possibility?
Well, I think that's a great suggestion, and I would certainly recommend that we be doing that for the fire hall as well as all of our significant apparatus. They're setting up a reserve. That would certainly be one of my recommendations, so that, yeah, when the time comes, we know, especially with the fire apparatus, that time frame to replacement is pretty well known, just because of requirements around that. But certainly with the building, council could consider, recoding, taking additional funds in the capital reserve. The 0.5% that we talked about that's being put to a general capital reserve right now, you could consider adding to that, and it goes specifically to the fire hall. There's a lot of options. There's current capital reserves that could be reallocated to that. So in addition to the significant balance that's in gas tax funds. So there's a number of different ways to look at this. One way you could look at it is using gas tax for it and leaving the current capital reserves for other projects, and then start to build the reserve for the next replacement. So or a combination of things. So I think certainly council wants to think about that this year in terms of how you might fund this, because there's an opportunity to get started sooner by making an additional contribution towards a reserve in the current year. You could identify it specifically within the financial plan as we're adding 1% to the tax rate specifically for funding the fire hall, for example. So there are a number of opportunities. I think that's a great suggestion.
And I love that. I think that it makes it a lesser impact and less of a political minefield, so forth, because we're taking it and spreading that over a large portion. And my own personal feeling is it would be strictly a reserve parking fund for the building. All the rest of the assets and so forth, the capital projects, you know, the equipment and so forth would be funded as we have been separately. And you know, I know you've created reserves for things like the big ones that we know when the large trucks and so forth are going to have to be replaced. And we're creating reserves for this, but I think it's important that we create one strictly for the building, that we set it aside now. So if you could work on coming back with a couple of options for council to consider, and so that we could start putting that aside right now. But in the meantime, I think what I see here on this is actually to allocate some funds up front right now to do an estimate, a study of what that addition renovation could look like. And so I think whatever that amount is, it would be a good time to start that right now, because, you know, it's just, we can't start soon enough as far as I'm concerned. So I think that would be a good first step, but if we could do this other two, actually.
For sure.
Thank you. Yeah, and everybody's pointed, but no, Councillor Grants. So sorry, you had, yeah.
If I may, just a quick tack on to your request there, Mr. Mayor, through to finances. Could we also, as part of that reserve analysis, include an analysis that would compare different ways of funding some of these large capital projects, given that we're in a high interest rate, high inflation environment right now? I'd be interested to see what the difference would be to fund something from, for example, like borrowing versus putting money aside and then accruing interest on the money that's been set aside. It could end up being that's more expensive, for example, for us to set money aside versus borrowing the money up front. So I'd love to see that analysis.
Good point, Councillor Gore.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to the fire chief for taking the time. And my question is, this $200,000 is just for the design and the cost estimates depending on what we come up with. And the $200,000 is what you're saying will probably not be sufficient? Is that what you meant, or will be like double or triple, or were you meaning about the total project cost?
Yeah, if I may, the original, the financial plan of the prior 5 years or so has had $1.4 million in it for a project cost. We know that that amount is going to be too low just based on kind of minimal renovations that the fire department would like to see. The 3.6 is our fire chief's best guess, just based on a number of halls that have been built recently or renovated. So we're working with that right now, and I'm suggesting that that number should be included within the final 5-year plan this year. But this initial work being proposed for this year would give us an idea if we're in the right order of magnitude. And again, and then decisions can be made about what the renovation includes and how many apparatus bays and things like that. The fire department has put a lot of thought into this and looks at other halls and sees what is of benefit and applies that to Parksville. So we're bringing our best estimates at this point, but this year is all about determining that design wise and some cost estimates.
Yeah.
Councillor Gore.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, because it's like Councillor Grants was mentioning, with inflation and rising costs and everything, I would like this to be as close to the start. So I hope as soon as we do the design and the cost estimate, we can, break ground and start doing it, rather than this being, a couple of years, then everything changes quite a bit, that we have to do another estimate and spend more money on it. So thank you.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is this is a building that's really impactful in our community. It needs to be very tied to the services we're providing. And so the design of it is very important. So taking some time to do that design that's appropriate with the appropriate input is a very important step. The fire chief may want to add to that, but I think it is really important that we put a lot of thought into what that design is and take some thoughtful approach to that.
Yeah, and just further on that, thank you. The 200,000 is a reasonable estimate, for the consultants and so forth to hire to have that study started right away. The sooner we get started on it, then the reality is I know how it works, and 2024, 25 is a realistic construction timeline. because we're going to take that much just to have the building design and so forth. There's all sorts of plans and drawings and so forth. But that will give you some seed money anyways to get the process going, which I think is worthy at this point.
What I'm hearing from our director of planning, just when I was chatting with him about what we think building permit fees might be coming up in the next 5 years, he said his phone has really slowed down in terms of builders that are calling and things like that. So it actually may end up being good timing on our part in that there may be builders that are actually looking for work now as compared to the last few years. So optimistically, maybe our prices won't be kind of keep skyrocketing as they have been. We might be at a sweet spot here where we might be able to take advantage of a bit of a downturn in construction. Obviously don't have a crystal ball, but that was what our director of planning's comment was to me.
Right.
Yeah.
And from what I understand, I agree that the Bank of Canada rates has certainly impacted the amount of new construction projects. They're not discontinued, they're just on hold. At this time, the good news was the Bank of Canada didn't move last week. Anyways, they may be tackling this inflation beast. And I would think that we're in a good position right now. It was great. Thank you. Oh, Councillor Martin, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am very supportive of moving on this, the $200,000. We've got to do this as soon as we can, just like all the other councillors said, because of the cost of things, and make sure we have this thing done properly. And then we'll have a really good estimate. So I'm just wanting to support. We've had a good discussion around here, and this is where I'm coming from too.
Thank you. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Chair. Very quick question. How does the RDN service fee work for capital projects? Thank you.
So through the mayor, there's a formula in which we look ahead at the next 20 years of capital, I think, and then we average it over the years and bring in an average into each year. We meet with the RDN each year just to revisit because, as you know, five-year financial plans can change depending on different grants that become available and different things. So sometimes those numbers can swing quite significantly. So there's provisions within the agreement to adjust for differences of more than a certain amount. And so the capital is, like I say, averaged over the years and fed into it that way. So one thought in terms of reserves would be to take the portion of the service fee that is related to capital and put that in the reserves related to some of this. So we could work the numbers backwards because it is all formula driven on how that's calculated.
Thank you, Ms. Jetta. I would like to say at this time, I'm being mindful of the time here. For those in the public, I would like to ask if I could ask if there's any questions from the public before we break. First off, see you, Elaine. Just 1 second. First off, have there been any written comments received to admin asking for questions regarding the budget?
Not that I'm aware
Our
of.
CAO Kaler is suggesting no. Thank you. We'll move to the public present. If you would like to bring your question up to the microphone, if you could, Elaine.
Hi, folks. Elaine Young, I live on Dogwood Street, 330 Dogwood Street, Unit 255 in lovely Parksville. I came here today as the president of the Oceanside Community Track Society, thinking that you may have some questions for me, but haven't heard any. So I'm going to speak to you a little bit as an individual school trustee. Because there were some things there that impacted the school district. And I wanted to give you some information about how we are doing our meetings now and why we are doing them in the way that we are. We've chosen to stay on Zoom. And the reason for that is that we find that we get more parents that way. We get more parents into our meetings. What I, as an individual school trustee, would really welcome is being able to do a hybrid meeting within this room, so that we could both be in person and have the convenience of people being able to Zoom in and speak. We have had operational difficulties with doing that. I would very much welcome whoever needs to have dialogue with our Secretary Treasurer, Ron Amos, on how we could modernize this to make it more acceptable to all of us. The other piece of this is our budget process, of course, is happening now. It starts in February. We get our little pot of money, as as Councillor Beal will know, from the government right probably this Friday. And then we have to, or we like to have our full budget passed for the year by the end of April or the end of May in order to stabilize our staffing. So that's our process. And so it's kind of important that if there is an ask from council that come really quickly, again, through our Secretary Treasurer, Ron Amos. And the other thing is, I know that in your last council meeting, you had deferred a decision around dry grad to your budget process. And I'm not involved, nor is the district involved with dry grad. It is a parent and student-led initiative. But I did suggest to my contacts at Bolinas Secondary that they might want to have someone come and talk to council about that event. So I think that's all, and it's mostly information. And thank you for your time, and thank you for doing this. And I'll try to be at the next meetings if time allows. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Young. Your comments have been noted by our admin staff. Thank you. Jetta, back to you. Thank you.
Okay, so just noting the time. What is council's preference in terms of continuing on? We've got a few more slides with the financial plan proposals. We could park the carry forwards until next meeting and not go through those today, although there's not a lot there that council hasn't already seen. So will we continue
Carry on.
for a little while? Okay.
Yeah.
We only have until 12:30 though.
Okay.
So we've maybe got another 10 minutes or so that we can
Go ahead.
realistically use. Okay. I'll talk really fast.
I'll turn off the microphones.
Okay. A couple of items from our IT staff. And these, as I mentioned earlier, could be funded out of the COVID grant. The first is similar to this room, is to update our meeting rooms that we have throughout the city facilities. There's 6 of them. And to modernize that equipment, to make it consistent across all of the meeting rooms themselves, so that that's an efficient way for IT to keep that equipment maintained. And so that would be to replace the TV, camera, and other modern connectivity options in those meeting rooms. So that's in operations as well as PCTC and the fire hall. It would be an $18,000 cost in 2023 and a 5-year replacement timeframe on those that then would be subsequently funded out of operating revenues.
Thank you, Mayor.
Councilor Gore.
Quickly, so since it's in the PCTC, I'm guessing these will be again the shared facilities with the school district and the VIU, or just solely for the city's use?
Yeah, through the mayor, these are just city facility meeting rooms. So there would be no sharing of cost in those.
Councilor Beal.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And a question through to our finance director. Is there a plan to what happens to the old equipment when something like this goes? Is it offered to other municipalities? Is it sold? I mean, I never hear about what happens if something's removed. Is there some, do we recoup some funds from that? And maybe it doesn't need to be answered here, but at some things.
Yeah, through the mayor, it's actually something we're looking at right now. Items of any value are dealt with through an auction, and that's part of our purchasing policy. The IT equipment is kind of another thing. On the one hand, it's outdated. On the other hand, it still perhaps has value. So we are actually looking at that at senior management level right now. The second IT is for a core switch redundancy to purchase another one of these. It's a critical factor for business continuity, again, in the event that there was some sort of emergency or climate event or storm, fire, whatever, that this would allow us to have continued service in our communications and IT equipment. So this would be a $7,000 cost in 2023, and again, on a 5-year replacement for that, and it could be funded out of those COVID funds. Okay, there's 2 items from operations. The first of which is some funding related to invasive plants. And we currently have $10,000 annually in the financial plan related to that. The incremental cost that we're proposing is $20,000 for a total of $30,000, which would be an annual cost and funded out of general operating revenues. So the main goals of this are protect at-risk species and a process of replanting native species as invasive ones are removed. The Director of Operations is here if there's any questions related to this.
Councilor Gore.
Thank you, Mayor. So if I understand, there's $10,000. Is it like an annual budget item for $10,000?
Yes, through the mayor,
Okay.
that's correct.
Thank you. How much of it are we using every year in the last 5 years, you think?
Through the mayor, my recollection is we use all of it. Yeah, there's been an annual
Right.
kind of contract related to that.
Councilor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Are the broom busters involved in this budget? Does it involve the broom busters or anything to do with broom? Because I know it's very invasive.
Yeah, I'd ask our Director of Operations to comment on that if possible.
If I may, Mayor?
Yes, you may.
So a broom is one of the invasive species, and we do work very closely with broom busters. There's more work than they can handle and our team can handle for broom as well as some other species. We have over 700 locations. Some are small that we're really trying to get a handle on and get ahead of the game on them. Some are around very sensitive sites, around Shelley Creek, around our watersheds, those sort of things that we want to make sure that we're dealing with. Also, if we're looking at water conservation, some of the things like canary reed in our wetlands, they take an exorbitant amount of water. It's actually planted by agricultural places when places are too swampy to try and help soak up the water. So trying to get rid of that would help actually recharge our aquifers and those things as well. So it's a very fulsome reason to why we do this. And we do actually I just met with Mivies and the naturalists on Monday. And we were talking about how can we do more and how they support us. So we do actually have more groups than just broom busters who help support us with volunteerism. But this is something that it's only going to get exponentially worse if we don't start putting some real dedicated funds and efforts into.
Thank you.
Just think what happened with the Canada geese.
I know. Oh,
Yeah,
I know.
they kind of took
I
over.
understand that totally. Thank you.
Councilor Gore.
Thank you, Mayor. Again, a quick kind of follow up on Councilor Martin's question to our Director of Operations. Thank you to you and the staff for all the work that you do. So the $30,000 is a big jump from 10,000. Can you briefly touch on the points that this will be used towards this money? And since there's a point about replanting native species, how would that work with the urban forestry strategy and the monies will be allocated to that in this project? Thank you.
So currently within our urban forest strategy, the only monies that we've allocated is to do our plan, and that will be coming forward to council. We're hoping in the third quarter. And from that, there will be identifiable items that we want to work on as well in all sorts of different ways. This is to start working on this year. The additional funds is to help have additional resources through contractual work or through additional staffing work to actually help to eradicate these. And then of course is to purchase and to reallocate native plants.
Thank you.
Okay.
Carry on.
Great. The final item is to move to the next steps on our tree inventory. The cost would be about $15,000 and could be funded out of gas tax or general operating revenues. This is really a first step in some of our natural asset management work in establishing a baseline inventory. And so this is a one-time cost, and then what might come from that would be documented in our asset management plans going forward. So the only other item on proposed financial plan items is staffing related items, and that will be brought to council as part of the March 27th. There's a closed portion of that budget meeting, and anything that comes from that would then be publicly included in subsequent financial plan versions. So that's March the 27th. And then the last item was the carry forward amounts. What I would like to suggest to council, given our time constraints, is that most of these you have seen already with the financial plan. What I can do is just as we move through the financial plan drafts, just identify these to you one by one as we're working through the different operational items. Would that be acceptable to council? Rather than spend time now going through them line by line, we can just identify them as the funding sources as we move through the minor capital and capital plans starting next week.
I think that would be even more effective, you know, to do it at that time. That would
Sure.
be, yeah, I think that would be just my estimate. Council, you agree with that? That's okay.
Okay.
That's great, Shannon. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, and see you again in a week.
Okay, staff, or council, do we have any further comments or questions from council? Before we adjourn, anything you need to comment on at this time? I see no further comments at this time. Thank you for everybody for all your participation.